If you are saying that the United States has been overtaken, is no longer dominant, well, who now rules the world?
You have been saying, or you've been arguing, that the West has not lost its global dominance, but you have to admit that its ability to enforce its will, the unipolar world that we were looking at maybe 20 years ago, looks very different now.
Well, we've got to be clear what the word dominant means, because it actually means two separate things, depending on the context in which you use it. Dominant can either mean who's in charge, who can control events, who can tell people what they can do and what they can't do. And there have been periods when the British Empire was able to do that. There were periods when the United States was able to do that. But even at its most powerful, it lost the Vietnamese War. And then more recently, it lost the war in Afghanistan. So over many years, even the country that was the most powerful in the world didn't always get its own way. So that's one meaning of dominance. But what we also have to take on board is, well, if it's not the West or the United States, who is it? Is there somebody else who's become dominant? Now, there may be a process at work, but the process, as we all know, if it's at all happening, and it is happening, but slower, I think, than people sometimes appreciate, it's not to replace the United States or NATO with China or with Russia. It's multipolar. It is the fact that you've got countries way beyond, forget America, forget China. You've still got countries like Brazil, Japan, South Korea, Nigeria, and India, and a dozen other countries, which are not going to be trying to rule the world. They're not going to be dominating in the sense of telling everybody else what to do, but nor can they be neglected or ignored as it might have happened in the past, because they are powerful economic forces. And when you become powerful economically, then you build up your military capability and you can influence events in a way that you couldn't beforehand. So I come back to the point, and it's a crucial point. If you are saying that the United States has been overtaken, is no longer dominant, well, who now rules the world? Because your initial question to me was a very important point. You went back to the end of the Cold War, and that was a very short interlude when the Soviet Union had collapsed, when the Cold War didn't exist any longer, when China had not yet emerged as the major or a major economic power as it is today, and when countries like Brazil and Indonesia and India were still a long, long way behind. So for that very short period, and it really was from 1990 till about 2010, yes, you could say that moment, not historically, for that moment, America was a super duper power. It had won the Cold War. Not technically, but you know what I mean. And that's when Fukuyama remarked it's the end of history. Liberal democracy, the Western way of government was going to dominate the world. That was always naive. Fukuyama should never have made that remark. He's probably the first person to admit he should never have made that remark, because it was always bound to be temporary. Nature abhors a vacuum. And indeed, gradually, and I won't even try and go through the sequence of events, we're all familiar with them, other powers have not replaced the United States, but now have to be taken into account. And that is healthy. It's not unhealthy, although it may be awkward occasionally, either for Europe or for North America.
Inna, from where you sit, do you see the West as having lost its dominant global position? You are, after all, in the absolute center of that contest.
Well, I was listening to the previous speakers and thinking that it's actually interesting because you do represent different perspectives than myself, of course, with the speakers representing the former empire. Say what you will about the current state of the United States, you can claim that it is partially, at least, has the notes of empire right now. But I'm from Ukraine. I'm from the country that actually used to be a colony of a country which we are not talking about so much right now, which never held the global dominance, but it definitely held the dominance of over the region, and that is of Russia. So I do think that is a very different perspective that we are looking at the issue ourselves. And I also think that, when I teach in class, I can have a theoretical debate, theoretical discussion about the dominance and whether we should need that or not. But I don't think at this point of time, I don't have the luxury for this theoretical, philosophical debate about whether it's good to have dominance or not, whether we should. Yep, I very much like the idea that we should move to Kantian world where everybody is trading freely, communicating freely, all the views are respected, and so on and so forth. But again, I don't think we can, at least from where I'm standing, I don't think I can afford thinking like that, because the reality is actually much harsher than that. The reality is that for me to be able to speak here right now with you, someone has to be dying on the trenches 500 kilometers away from where I'm sitting. And that is the daily reality for us for many, many years as of right now. So I do think that we should be more realistic in discussing those ideas, and we should understand that. I'm trying to imagine whether this debate could have taken place in China, whether it could have taken place in Russia. What the world is we are moving towards. They don't debate about that. They are moving towards a new world. They are taking active steps to actually dominate the world in different manners. They don't debate about whether that's going to be good or bad. They're just moving in that direction to take over, militarily, trade-wise, in any possible way. So I do think we have to recognize this, that it's not just the military threat to Ukraine. China, Russia, they're all interfering in the elections, in elections held in different countries on the West. And that is something that we should keep in mind, that, again, it's not just a threat to Ukraine right now. It's not just a military threat. They're actually actively trying to interfere in the affairs of the West. I might be biased here. I am biased. I don't pretend to be unbiased here. Of course, I am biased because we are on the very center of this collision between different civilizations. But I do think that it is also important for the West to remember that it's not like the West can stand aside and just watch what is going to happen. It's not like the West can stand neutral. It's not like the West can just shy away from the idea of dominance. Yeah, we don't like the idea of dominance, and it's non-democratic, something from the past, it's something from the history, and so on and so forth. But then there should be a clear understanding of, okay, if not Western dominance, then what? What is the alternative to the Western dominance? Yeah. And yes, I like the idea that it should be the rules-based order and so on and so forth, but we don't have a way to get there as of right now. We do have, Penny did mention that the Security Council, well, okay, how do we get through Russia in the Security Council? We don't have a way to get past Russia in there. So how can we move towards the rule-based order? And if we don't have the way to move there, then we should think about, okay, then what is the strategy for the West right now?
Okay, so Penny, is it surely the inability to support Ukraine as it needs to be supported, the inability to repel Russian aggression, isn't that just a symptom of the fact that the West has lost its dominant global position?
So I'd say three things here. I agree with what's been said about the definition of what you mean by a dominant position. I actually think that the most important thing to focus on, although I completely get what Elizabeth says about who's chairing the World Bank is quite relevant to many nations, but I think the most important thing for democracies is the hit that we've taken on our own self-confidence. And this is in part response from China, Russia, Iran, others, deliberately trying to undermine our confidence in our way of life, what we stand for, why it is in our own interests as well as the interests of humanity that we hold certain things dear and that we operate in a particular framework. That, I think, has rocked us. And we have to find a way of combating that. We have to communicate to our citizens in a much better way why pursuing these things is absolutely in their interests. And I think this is particularly important for younger generations, because if people stop believing democracy works, democracy dies. So I think these are very fundamental issues that we are grappling with. And so I think the most pressing issue when you look at the dominance of democracies or the West is that issue. Two further things. If we are less relevant to other nations, then we're less powerful. If we don't have hard power as we need it, we are less relevant to partners and prospective partners. We're less able to protect our own interests. Ditto on our diplomatic networks. So we have to really ensure that we are investing in these things. And then finally, to the point on Ukraine, I think this is an example of us having become detached from what is actually in our interests, our collective interests, and having that clarity and strategic vision for our nations and our partners. If the aid that they have been providing to date to Ukraine does not continue, what is Europe going to do? But we should not forget that that is a choice. And I think that we need to go back and think about some pretty fundamental things. And this, what I'm saying about Ukraine, I can also say about our relationship with China as well. And I think it's that lack of focus on those fundamental issues that has, if there is a wobble on our position on the global stage, that is at the heart of it.
So I want to move on to the question of how the West